Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, the House passes a measure to strengthen regulation of food processing plants by the Georgia Department of Agriculture. The Senate approves legislation to reset Hope Scholarship funding triggers because of strong lottery reserves. And our leadership series of interviews continues with Senate Rules Committee Chairman Don Balfour. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, and Wandy Lawson and David Zelski.
Hello, everyone. Also on tonight's broadcast, Senator Don Thomas says it's time for the state to require the use of seatbelts in pickup trucks.
And funding is restored for school nurses, but legislators talk of possible furloughs for Georgia's teachers. Our top story tonight, though, changes to regulation of food processing plants. The House today approved Senate Bill 80, empowering the Georgia Department of Agriculture to protect consumers from public health dangers like the one caused when the Blakely-based Peanut Corporation of America distributed salmonella-tainted products nationwide. Former employees of the Peanut Corporation of America tell a story of unsanitary processing conditions, including grease-covered floors and a leaky roof that allowed birds to fly in. Federal Food and Drug Administration documents reveal that plant management knew about the presence of salmonella, but current state law doesn't require processors to report to the State Department of Agriculture. HB 80 would make failure to report these lab results or falsifying them a felony.
Basically what this does is when there's a problem shows up, now a food processing plant is not responsible for reporting any kind of lab results. It may be a positive test for any kind of stuff like salmonella. Now they have to do that. They have to report it within 24 hours to the Department of Agriculture.
HB 80 passed 158-0. Changes made by the House Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Committee send that bill back to the Senate. Last week, the House passed HB 381, which would allow local health inspectors to enter a food processing plant or facility and check for possible cases of unsanitary food manufacturing. That bill is currently in the Senate Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Committee.
3 House bills passed the Senate this morning. The first, HB 157, changes the triggers for certain parts of Hope Scholarship funding. Senate Higher Education Chairman Seth Harp explains.
Does one thing, it softens somewhat the triggers that we adopted 3 years ago in lowering the book fees and then ultimately the activities fees. This softens those hard and fast things that we did 3 years ago. And the reason behind this is that there is more revenue in the reserve fund. It's almost $1 billion. I think it's in excess of $900 million in the lottery for the lottery scholarship. And what we're doing by doing this is will allow for folks to keep their lottery scholarship, the book portion of it and the activities fees in the process. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does this in any way change the formula by which we have the reserve funds and allot it for books and fees? Does it change the verbiage when available or anything like that?
No, it does not. The only thing it does is just makes it a little, before we start cutting those fees, the money stream has to go down further.
After the 47-2 passage of HB 157, they passed HB 80. This lowers the minimum number of employees needed to be eligible for health insurance contracts. Senator Jack Murphy carries that bill and explains.
Right now, a publicly traded company can have at least 2 eligible employees to create a COLA group policy. And they are requiring a private company to have at least 100 eligible employees. This bill simply changes that to coincide with the publicly traded company and requires that you only have 2 employees, just like the publicly traded companies, to offer a COLA plan.
And SB 80 passed unopposed and now goes to Governor Perdue.
The House today passes a resolution urging Congress to oppose the Freedom of Choice Act, which prohibits state or federal intervention in women's reproductive rights. Representative Jerry Keene told the House that although the current Congress has not introduced this legislation, its passage would imperil several Georgia laws.
It would vacate the work that we've done on the Woman's Right to Know Act, partial birth abortion, parental consent, 24-hour waiting, and other common sense laws that we have enacted. So I'm asking you this morning, if you would, to join with me in sending a message to our delegation in Washington, asking them that if in fact the Freedom of Choice Act is introduced this session, that they would oppose that.
Abortion opponent Representative Bobby Franklin spoke against the resolution, saying that it amounts to little more than political posturing.
If in fact the so-called Freedom of Choice Act had been introduced, I think a more reasonable urging resolution wouldn't be urging at all. It would be putting them on notice that if they tried to enforce something that was unconstitutional, like getting involved in health care in our state, that their agents trying to enforce that unconstitutional action would find themselves visiting some of our fine jails. That's the type of thing we need to let them know. But that's not the issue before us. The issue before us is, are we going to embarrass this House by urging Congress to oppose something that does not even exist?
House Resolution 334 passed 92-55. Because it's a resolution solely from the Georgia House of Representatives, it does not require Senate approval. Well, a special State House subcommittee met late today to decide the fate of a Senate bill backed by the governor. But the measure, which realigns the state's transportation agencies, may have hit a roadblock. Lawmakers' Valerie Edwards is standing by live at the Capitol with the latest. Valerie.
And Wandy, we've heard a lot about Senate Bill 200, which relegates the Georgia DOT to maintenance and inspection. But one thing we haven't spoken a lot about is what happens to the DOT board after SB 200 goes into effect. Assembly elects the board, one each from the state's 13 congressional districts, for a term of 5 years. Under SB 200, backed by Governor Perdue, appointments to the board would come 5 from the governor and 3 each from the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House. But that's an idea that's not sitting well with Representative Fran Miller. Miller has introduced an amendment to SB 200, which ensures the General Assembly retains the right to elect the DOT board.
At the end of the day, it's really pretty much the Georgia House of Representatives who elects the DOT board members. Okay? It's the one area where we really have that type of control with. Because theoretically, these 3 people could appoint whoever. Now, yes, we're supposed to, ratify it, I guess. But, it's you just don't give that type of thing up.
As this session winds down and the House and Senate attempt a compromise on their respective T-SPLOS proposals, Governor Perdue has made it clear he will not sign off on any new transportation tax measure unless he gets SB 200. Senate Speaker Pro Tem Tommy Williams sponsors SB 200, and today he told the House committee, quote, "It's not about board members, it's about getting the work out the door."
We need somebody to say, what do we need for Georgia? And what can we afford to do? And let's put those on a list, and let's make sure we get them done. And if there are other projects that we can add, if we pass a funding bill, we'll do some more projects. Now, whatever you want to do on governance to get this bill moving is important. And you know, that's the decision you make, and those amendments we'll look at when they come back to the Senate, if it comes back to the Senate. But do as you will. But I want to tell you some of the best parts of the bill. The best parts of the bill are the fact that you get to govern over the budget.
Now, the House Subcommittee on Transportation Funding has wrapped up today's meeting on SB 200. At last count, 6 amendments had been added to an already 102-page bill. The thing is, everyone agrees that they're not going to let this session pass without doing something on transportation. Reporting live, I'm Valerie Edwards for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that report, Valerie. Well, Georgia is now the only state that does not require seatbelt use in pickup trucks, an issue that brought Senator Don Thomas to the well this morning. Senator Thomas sponsors SB 5. This would change the law to require seatbelt use in trucks unless they are being used for agricultural pursuits. The bill passed the Senate earlier this session with only 4 dissenting votes, and Senator Thomas says it's time to save lives and pass it in the House.
I know this body is behind this bill. And I want you to help me convince the House. I don't just want a hearing over there. I think it deserves a vote of the full House. And I will certainly abide by that vote. While we have had this over there for 3 years now without even a hearing, it's not time for a hearing, it's time for a vote. And you know, I'm low-key ordinarily, and I just want to do what's right, just like you do. And the right thing to do is to vote on this bill in the House. And I had hoped to just remain quiet, but I think going public with it and going to the newspapers and all over the state with an op-ed is worthwhile. Hopefully it'll make the House members think about what they should do, and then it will educate the public. 93.8% of the people in Georgia on polls favor this legislation. And when we're getting approximately 100 people killed needlessly every year, it's time to do the right thing. And I call on you, all of you have probably about 3 representatives in your district or parts of it, and I call on you to speak to them over in the House and tell them, we want this bill voted on, we want to save lives, and the blood of those young people is on somebody's hands that's not doing the right thing.
And as Senator Thomas mentioned, SB 5 has not yet been heard in House committee.
The House is expected to vote as early as tomorrow on the FY 2010 budget. Although the education line items have been approved, Appropriations Education Subcommittee Chairman, Representative Edward Lindsey, suggests that furloughing teachers on some non-classroom days might retain jobs in peril.
By taking, for instance, 6 furlough days, and these would be furlough days dealing with the planning days, and not cutting into the instructional days, we would be able to save $200 million in this state. What we could do with that money is then pour that money back into QBE and equalization and give these school systems greater flexibility in terms of trying to protect these teacher jobs. $200 million equates to somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 teacher jobs that could be saved. And I'm hearing also a lot from the teachers as well. They recognize that we are in tough economic times. They are the only state employees, for instance, that even got a pay raise in 2009. No other ones got a pay raise. If we were to roll back the 6 days, all we're really doing is taking away that 2.5% raise that they're the only ones who got in the entire state.
A representative of the Professional Association of Georgia Educators told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that his organization thinks the plan is a bad idea. But Jeff Hubbard, president of the Georgia Association of Educators, says his members consider it a good compromise of last resort, especially if it will save jobs.
If anything does happen, we'd prefer to know about it on the front end rather than on the back end. But the key here is looking at the stimulus package, what our systems are going to be able to do with it, and also looking at the stimulus packages coming from the Department of Education that would also help address some of these funding shortfalls.
But your teachers will have already signed their contracts, right, by the time they can come back and have a special session.
Right, and that's one of the questions, would this be a breach of contract? And the way the contracts are written, there are codicils in them that school systems, when needed, can change the terms of employment. And so if there is, as somebody would say, a take back of days or a furlough, that would be possible.
Representative Lindsey told me that the budget approved by the House Appropriations Education Subcommittee includes funding for graduation coaches, salary bonuses for National Board Certified teachers, and a $30 million restoration for school nurses. Representative Alisha Thomas Morgan today read a list of illnesses treated by school nurses from popsicle sticks provided by students at a school in her district.
Nasal congestion, menstrual needs, headache and fever, hit on the head with a jump rope. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to take some time this morning to thank the members of the Appropriations Education Subcommittee that found money with the help of the federal dollars to fund our school nurses. So it is my hope that the Senate will follow suit, as will the governor, so that we can continue to fund school nurses across Georgia and allow teachers to do their jobs.
The Senate Education and Youth Committee passed legislation today that would provide a program for high school students to attend post-secondary colleges for high school credit. Lawmakers Minu Hosseini was there and joins us live from the Capitol with more. Minu.
David, House Bill 149 seeks to create a program that would allow juniors and seniors in high school to attend post-secondary schools for credit, paid for through state funds. The legislation is called the Move On When Ready Act. Bill's sponsor, Representative Jan Jones, explains.
What the bill will do is it will allow 11th and 12th grade students to leave their assigned public high school and attend a college or technical school to complete graduation requirements while earning college credit. The bulk of the students that would be served by this are those that are most at risk or often at risk of dropping out. You know, they're at the age in 11th and 12th grade that with parental permission now they can drop out anyway. So this gives them one more alternative if they are either underserved by, unserved by, or just not inspired by where they are. So that instead of dropping out or just sort of making do, they can go somewhere else.
And although some legislators expressed concern about this bill negatively affecting eligibility for the Hope Scholarship program, Representative Jones said that the post-secondary school or college courses would not deduct credits from the students' Hope Scholarship credit hours.
The hours will not count towards any Hope caps. Of course, in this case, we're not using lottery dollars, but it mentions that in the bill. It probably didn't have to. That's the way it is now. But I did want to make that clear that it doesn't, and I guess I don't think it should, because they are still high school students.
House Bill 149 received a due pass recommendation and will now move on to Senate rules. Reporting live, I'm Minu Hosseini for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks, Minu. Well, we invite you to check out GPB's online resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. Find the latest from GPB's radio news team and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more at gpb.org/lawmakers. And our leadership interview series continues today with Senate Rules Chairman Don Balfour. This position plays a key role in deciding which bills make the general calendar for floor debate the next day. I had the opportunity to speak with Senator Balfour earlier this afternoon. I began by asking him about the choices made for Crossover Day 30.
As you get to Crossover Day, senators have, at this point in time, we had about 100, 200 bills. Obviously, we couldn't take any more than about 25 or 30 in any day, and so we had to cut it down and look at what we thought was important and try to do the most important 25. That left 75% of the bills on the cutting floor not to make it out, and there was a priority that we looked at, and the committee itself looks at what they find important, and every member of that committee got 2 picks. So we let all the committee members have some input and decide what the most important thing was on the floor.
Well, the budget has obviously been one of the big issues this year, and rightfully so. But another issue that hit a little bit earlier this session was the Georgia Power Bill, and that's one that was spearheaded by you. Why do you believe it was important to have the citizens of Georgia help Georgia Power finance these 2 nuclear power plants?
Georgia Power is building a nuclear power plant that will help us conserve and have cleaner energy. One way or another, the state of Georgia, the citizens of Georgia pay for those plants. That's the way the current laws are set up. And if you live in an area that has Georgia Power or Walton EMC or one of the EMCs, you pay for the cost of that plant when the lights are finally turned on. If we pay for it early, if we pay a little money as we go along, We saved the interest on interest, the accumulated interest. There was over $350 million of interest that would no longer be in the construction costs. That means there's less money for Georgia Power to recoup, but also it means our bills over the next 60 years will be about 20% cheaper than they would have been otherwise.
Okay, so that's looking ahead to the future. Let's look at another issue where we are trying to look ahead to the future. That is the Transforming Transportation Act, which recently passed. Do you believe this is enough right now to really get transportation issues rolling to help alleviate some of this traffic?
It's very important that we handle this. I think both the House and the Senate agrees on this. We just got to come up with the right method to do it.
Okay, we just have a little bit of time left, but what are some key issues that you think we need to see in the remainder of the session?
The budget's probably the big thing, the 10 budget. We have huge financial problems. We have huge reductions in revenues, so we have to make cuts, and we're trying to make the cuts that will hurt the citizens the least and help the least among us the most. And so that's probably the big issue that we have. Obviously, we have transportation. We have a couple other tax bills that are coming to the floor, and hopefully we can do some of those things to help the citizens of Georgia.
Okay, Senate Rules Committee Chairman Don Balfour, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
A bill that requires HIV testing for incarcerated inmates before they're released to the general public is making its way through the General Assembly. Today, that bill was heard in the House State Institutions and Property Committee late this afternoon, actually. Lawmakers Tiana Fernandez joins us live with more. Tiana, what can you tell us?
Yes, well, Senator Kasim Reed is the sponsor of Senate Bill 64, which passed through the Senate last week by committee substitute.
Although Senate Bill 64 received support from the members of the House State and Institutions and Property Committee, many voiced their frustration with funding not being immediately available. Senator Reed agreed.
I've been working on this bill 2 years. Believe you me, I would love to see the funding there. The cost of an HIV test is $4 right now. That is the cost that we would have to spend to find this out. And I believe in this General Assembly at the appropriate time will fund it.
Alan Adams, the director for the Office of Health Services, says he supports any legislation that works on improving the public's health, but does not believe that with the current economic situation, he can afford to fund the bill.
With the $14 million we currently spend and the fact that our budget was cut, our medical budget was cut by over $4 million yesterday for next year, makes it very difficult for us to make ends meet to add any expenditure to our health care expenses.
And with funding being the major concern, the committee chairman decided to assign the bill to a subcommittee to resolve some of these issues.
All right, Tiana, thanks so much for that report.
Thank you.
Well, in other news, the chair of the Senate Veterans and Military Affairs Committee is pushing the Senate to pass a resolution condemning proposed changes to Veterans Administration health benefits. Senator John Douglas says the potential harm to servicemen and women crosses political lines.
We're not going to bash the president. We're just going to talk about the issue. The idea here is the federal government wants to recoup $540 million on the backs of veterans when we're going to have a budget in 2010 of $3,750 billion. $540 million back from the veterans. This is a government that's been paying out and paying out and paying out, and now all of a sudden wants to recoup.
Senator Douglas is calling on all 56 senators to sign a resolution opposing the privatization of veterans' health insurance. About an hour later in the House, Representative Brian Thomas took House Republicans to task for applauding a speech given yesterday by Representative Melvin Everson, a veteran who opposes changing Veterans Administration health coverage. Representative Thomas also challenged House Speaker Glenn Richardson for allowing an ovation in violation of House rules.
I just wondered if only 2 short years ago, under former President George W. Bush, when you read the criticism of the deplorable conditions in Walter Reed Army Hospital, the rat and cockroach-infested conditions that our service members were subjected to, when you saw that in the morning newspaper, did you stand up and knock over your cereal bowl to clap for that criticism? Was it your love for the military that you applauded yesterday, or was it something else? I don't really know what your purpose was in doing that, but Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that I think it's a good thing that you indulge us over House rules on occasion, but I do hope that the next time you allow latitude for a standing ovation, that at least it is something that the entire body can cheer for rather than a thinly veiled partisan political attack on our sitting president. I yield the well.
Would you like for me to gavel that down? I didn't think so.
Two-term Atlanta Mayor Shirley Franklin is nearing the end of her final term. She was honored in both the House and Senate today, and Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle added a few kind words about her performance and character. Mayor Franklin begins.
It's been my privilege to serve the people of Georgia who live in Atlanta. That's a slightly different way of saying it, but I say it with a great deal of pride. Georgia's a great state, and I have enjoyed the challenges as well as the opportunities availed of me as a resident of Georgia and as someone who sees public service as among the best opportunities to improve your community. I end my service in my second term at the end of this year in December of 2009. And I will not tell you that this has not been a challenging time. I know you know that from your own work facing certain economic downturns. But the people of Atlanta are proud to be Georgians. They want to be a part of a vibrant state. They want to be a part of a caring state, a green state, and they want to live in a safe community. And my pledge to you is that from now until the end of my term, I will do my very best. Thank you very much.
I just want to say this has been a wonderful mayor. She's been a great friend of mine. I have worked with her over the years as a senator and also as a lieutenant governor. I respect her as a person, her leadership style. I have always found her to be fair, firm, and consistent, which I think are the ingredients that make for a great leader. She has done something really, really special for our city. We're grateful for her, and we're going to miss her, and I'm confident she's going to have great, great success for the future.
Well, coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, the House will consider legislation that expands access to child abuse records, and the governor's super speeder legislation is scheduled to be debated in committee. We'll have those stories and all the latest Capitol news tomorrow night on Lawmakers at 7 p.m. If you've missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. when Lawmakers repeats here on GPB. You can also see this episode of Lawmakers at 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can keep up with all of the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up next here on GPB Television, Georgia Traveler, and tonight's episode features the historic South region of Georgia around Macon. Georgia Traveler is coming up next here on GPB.
And that is our broadcast for this, the 32nd legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm David Zelski.
And I'm Wandy Lawson. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for Lawmakers, and have a great evening.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.